I find it very interesting. We often in the manufacturing space, industrial space, we often focus on reducing costs as a means to justifying projects to our executive branch. And to me, it's one thing that really stuck out between Jack and Victor about what they said is in both cases, it was actually revenue enhancement, revenue growth that justified their programs. And think about it, that one sure way to get executive attention to approve a project is to show them how to grow revenue. And it makes a lot of sense. I think that's a lesson learned for me anyway out of this session. Jeff, if I could ask you, I'm assuming Core Systems, sells into other industries or other types of applications. If you could just talk about other areas that you've had success.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have probably about half of our customer base is manufacturing, and then we'll be working with a lot of clients, whether it's industrial equipment like farm equipment or construction equipment. We do some in medical, building services, high tech, med tech. So pretty much across the board. In addition to the core field service platform, one of our focus areas is called crowd service. And it's really intended to help, say, companies like Jack or other industrial manufacturers who may depend on dealers, independent service providers, freelancers in different marketplaces to be able to give them kind of a digital touch point like Amazon, so that regardless of where their customers are requesting their service from, it's always coming through the same channel. The independents are able to sign up to the platform and in a way that tries to optimize the response time, so they're always getting the right skills. And then the manufacturers have a very consistent experience, and they're able to have visibility through the entire service chain and provide a better overall customer experience than they might otherwise be able to do if they're just kind of throwing it over the fence to different service providers across the board. And of course, a lot of the technologies we've talked about in this session, as well as some of the other sessions with AR, and just guided procedures on the devices can really help ensure quality service delivery at the point of service again. And I think the statistics are within 2 years, more than 40% of field service work will be done by people who don't work for the OEMs or manufacturers. So you need to manage that customer experience.
Thanks, Jeff. A similar question for you, Libor. I'm assuming that your application gets sold beyond just medical devices. I wonder if you could characterize that a little bit for us.
Yeah, sure. Med device manufacturing is actually one of our strongholds, but we have customers across a variety of industries. ServiceMax got about a year ago acquired by GE Digital, and before that, our traditional kind of markets were med devices, industrial manufacturing, building and construction, high-tech manufacturing, and so on, right? Since we are now part of GE Digital, it's exciting, and we now have access to a lot of new verticals, kind of the verticals where GE is very strong: oil and gas, power and utilities, aviation, transportation. And so we've been expanding into those markets as well. I know that a lot of you probably in the audience are from those markets, so it's been kind of very interesting. And if we think about our angle, is really helping customers on kind of their transformational journey, right? We like to think about this maturity model where the basics is getting the visibility and getting the cost under control. That's kind of the step one. Step two usually is about the revenue, whether it's service revenue, selling more parts and consumables, or actually customer experience and thus selling more in general, right? Net promoter scores, things like that. The third level is really transforming the business, and a lot of people are looking at that today, moving towards outcome-based models, right? So GE is a good example. The aircraft engines used to be sold in pairs for each aircraft, right? Today it's sold in 10,000 hours of flight capacity, right? Similarly, power turbines used to be sold, 3 turbines for this power plant. Now it's basically X megawatts of or gigawatts of generating capacity. So those are the kind of models. And those models are only possible if you combine the equipment with the service.
Okay.
So it's kind of being packaged all together. And that's really exciting when you can accomplish that kind of transformation.
Good, good. So at this point, I'd like to transition to questions from the audience. Preet will be carrying the microphone if there are any questions. I see one hand coming up over there.
Hey guys, James Gordy from Realware. We make one of the potential AR glasses that you might have discussed up there. So my question is, we're working with about 10 companies that have deployed similar solutions to the Markham project. And basically what we've seen is with remote video, they'll put these with their machines like you were mentioning, and then 8 out of 10 calls, they can turn their customers into field service technicians. But this could get really messy really quickly when you have a big facility where you have 100 machines instead of just one, and they come from a bunch of different service providers. And of course, big industrial automation companies like GE might have a future say in this market, Honeywell, Emerson, all these guys. So how do you see the relationship between companies like yourself and also, so basically individual machine manufacturers and people that basically you're a Honeywell plant, you're a GE plant, and they provide all the services and customer support for an entire facility? How do you see the business model and relationship working between companies like yourself and basically industrial automation integrated companies?
Let me make sure I understand that right. So you're comparing service provided by the OEM with service by a local service provider, a local contractor? Or the in-house maintenance staff that may be in the plant?
Yeah, I mean, it could go a bunch of different ways. There's going to be a bunch of different machines in the facility, and so maybe you just have one device for each machine, right? So you have 100 devices sitting by each machine. Or maybe there'll be 5 of these, and you can use them to service all of your machines, and they might call you guys, or they might call a Honeywell technician, or they might call someone else. And so that could get pretty complex pretty quickly when you talk about the customer service infrastructure behind that supports fixing machines remotely and diagnosing them.
So maybe I can answer that one. I mean, from
Go
our
ahead, Jack.
perspective, on my last slide, I was mentioning also that I would like to double basically our workforce that can do, I would say, level 1 type of activity. So for that, I don't exclude companies that are in the same market as we are, and that could be, the Tetra Paks or the Bühlers, etc. of the world, and say, okay, well, let's see if we can, how can we partner together to say, okay, can you perform level 1 activity for us when you do a commissioning of 3 months, for instance, of a machine? So that's very well possible, and I really would like to explore this kind of possibilities.
So so in that case, is your piece of equipment attached to a larger piece of equipment like Tetra Pak?
Yes, many times yes, but
okay.
not necessarily. I mean,
Okay.
if you are in the same market,
Yeah.
we can do level 1 activity for them, and they can do it for us.
Okay.
It's never explored, but I mean, why not?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All right.
Just maybe I can just add something quickly to that question. We've seen cases similar even outside of manufacturing where, say, for example, you have a vehicle manufacturer, and that vehicle manufacturer, maybe they make engines, they have their own service network, they have independent dealers that provide those engines, but then there's OEMs that will have those engines in their equipment. All of them have service staff, so what we're seeing a trend towards when I talk about crowd service is having that capacity visible to everyone on a platform, kind of like Uber. So when somebody requests a service, the system through automation is going to look at where is the closest, best available capacity to respond to that, to minimize the downtime, to get the optimal response time, low service cost, all of those sorts of things. And it may be that it's actually coming from the OEM's shop versus the manufacturer's shop. And again, as Jack mentioned, there's agreements that need to be put in place in the background. But if you have that overall capacity visible to everybody, you can tend to optimize it for a better customer experience.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, there's also another side to this, right? Because on one hand, you have business models where the service can be fairly flexibly delivered by a multitude of players. On the other hand, you have models where it's a very regulated industry, and if it's a jet engine or a med device, it's highly regulated, and you aren't allowed to touch it unless you have a certain level of certification, right? And so in that case, you can't do these things easily. A lot of our customers are looking at some of these tools like AR, and it's very, very useful from sort of training, enablement, getting them quick up to speed type of point of view, helping with the very fast innovation cycle that we have in some of these high-tech markets, right, where the innovation cycle is outpacing the training cycle. They can't train them fast enough. So for that reason, it's a very useful tool, but it's not necessarily the scenario where you would just hand it over to somebody who is, semi-trained and let them touch this equipment. They're just not allowed to do that.
No, but that's a fair point. I think, in different industries, you have different type of challenges. And if I tell this to my technicians, that I want to train them, or at least consider that they will have to repair a Tetra Pak machine, they will kill me. So there will be a lot of things that we have to do, basically. But I do believe that's the future. But how to crack the code, okay, that's something that we have to look for. But I really believe that there will be possibilities here.
All right.
All right. Hello. So my name is Robert Sammons. I have a quick question regarding the asset performance management type contracting that you described around the 10,000 hours operation. Goodyear does it on tires per landing. Now we're talking about moving this model into a service model for asset performance management contracting around equipment. My question is right now, if you talk to any owner-operator in the industry, their number one problem is scheduling just-in-time service that really meets their schedule needs. How do you accommodate that with this model, and is it going to drive costs up of these services that negate the savings you're projecting here?
So I want to make sure that I understand the question, but you are saying that the number one priority is basically the timeliness of the service delivery?
Yes, because plants can't afford downtime because that's revenue dollars.
Right. So the beauty in the outcome-based model, as I call it, is that both sides, both parties to that transaction have the same common interest. They want that equipment to be up and running, right? So if you are paying me for keeping the equipment that you are using, and we have agreed on the business model, it is now in my vital interest to make sure that that engine doesn't stop, that turbine doesn't stop spinning, right? And so I will use the vast resources I have, the experience I have from your use case, as well as everybody else's use case in this room, right, in order to do it in the best possible way so that you don't have to worry about that.
So do you have the resources to address needs on a just-in-time basis?
So that's the difference between the OEM and the operator, right? I'm the software provider.
Yeah.
My customers are either the OEMs or the operators. But I think both examples here have shown, of the customers here, have shown that the OEMs actually have a very strong case in delivering the service because they have those kind of resources.
Well, it's a transference model, right? I mean, you're basically moving headcount requirements at the operations level to your staff and taking on that liability and risk for a resource, where by shifting that, it's got to increase the cost of your business. So my question, I guess, boils down to, is the right approach to train the resources in the plant like they've always done, where they actually have people running 24/7, 365 on multiple shifts? And that's really the issue, is that going into these asset performance management contracts, you can reduce headcount by 30% possibly and utilize a specialized resource for specific functions. And I think Honeywell and ABB both offered asset performance management contracting services. They have had initiatives anyways to do this with some level of success, but the ultimate issue became personnel management and transfer of technology. And I think what this gentleman was advocating is technologies that give you just-in-time sequence of operations to service these things. I think your labeling system will kind of do the same function, where you have a QR, you read it, and it basically gives you instructions on how to service that piece of equipment. Correct. I think that's the real message, is from our standpoint, is as an industry, people don't want to see costs continue to increase because it becomes unpalatable, because we're driven to shareholder value growth, obviously. So from a financial standpoint, we got to create effective solutions that are eloquent and meet the need, but don't drive costs through the ceiling. And by transferring headcount, we drive costs through the ceiling because it becomes your liability or the service provider's liability, and the OEMs may not have that resource or may not have that expertise in plant. They're going to say, well, we have expertise on our systems, right? But do they actually have expertise in that process? And they're very, very different, because the process is what makes the money. That's their IP. Your system, a turbine, for example, is one thing, but what are the impacting strange factors that cause that turbine to fail? Those are things that we have to understand, and it generally lies in the plant's IP, not in the vendors or OEMs. In fact, many times they can help the vendor or OEM understand bigger problems. So the question is do you advocate these solutions to be subscription-based services that you can project down to the owners so they can cross-train their staff, and then they become a supplement to your staff?
On that's where we see a lot of companies really experimenting with an augmented or contingent workforce that is basically a pool of resources that includes the OEM's resources, it includes the customer's own maintenance resources, and it may include resources that are in the area from other providers that have skills that are relevant to ensuring maximum uptime and also ensuring near real-time service when the request comes in for all the reasons you're saying. Obviously, engaging that sort of contingent labor force, or that pool of resources, requires technology to help facilitate the engagement. Again, I used the Uber example earlier to request it in the first place. And then some of the technologies that we've been talking about, and the gentleman over here around the augmented reality, to help ensure the delivery is consistent. But it's pretty much not practical or affordable for any organization to have the perfect number of service resources everywhere they need them. So you see a lot of people starting to experiment with more flexible labor models for that reason as well. So.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, if you look at our organization, my ideal situation is that the customers are trained, and that they can do the first level break fix themselves. And we train them, we'll support them, whatever we can. But it really depends on the industry we are in. Some are very well equipped with their own technical force, but we have also, the chicken farm, or, the bakery, and they don't have this kind of resources, and they rely on you. And they still want to have this type of services, because their production processes are very important as well for them. But yeah, I mean, the more closer to the machinery it can be serviced, the better it is, I would say.
Are you also bringing up another issue? In this case, each one of these pieces of equipment is standardized pieces of equipment. Are you starting to bring up customized pieces of equipment, engineered to order or modified by the end user? Because that is, probably another area of interest to explore. because I'm not really buying into the idea that if you're using standardized pieces of equipment as part of your process, that there is an IP in there that is part of the process control system, and if you give that maintenance of the equipment over to the OEM, somehow or another you lose control of your process. I'm not.
I don't think that's really the concern so much as the fact that plants run with a staff of people. Those maintenance and reliability engineers service these pieces of equipment. They service them because their job is to keep production coming out of the end of that pipe.
Yes.
Because that's revenue at a good quality. The issue is that with the just-in-time approach model, you're going to have to start growing your job pool, your technical resource pool to service these needs. And the issue is there's a huge gap. You have aging workforce issues, you have technology transfer issues, you have just general competency and understanding of equipment issues.
If I could interrupt, it sounds like you're not buying into using IoT and good field service management applications to outsource maintenance.
I don't agree with not using the technology. I think it's great for alarming and monitoring. It's brilliant technology and it's where it belongs. What I think my bigger concern is that everyone makes these broad brush promises around being able to service things on a just-in-time approach, and you don't have the resources to service the industry
the
need.
other problem I'm having, I shouldn't call it a problem, the other thing I want to pick up on is this idea of just-in-time, meaning that it also sounds like you're not buying into predictive maintenance, meaning they will be able to forecast when it fails and schedule maintenance prior to when it fails. You still seem to be in the paradigm where it breaks,
I
and
think
I need
people
somebody
run,
to respond
the run to
quickly.
fail model is what the industry and the financial business models that Wall Street supports today are built on. And if that doesn't change, this model doesn't work.
What model is built on?
Well, Wall Street, I mean, if you look at the way the accountants structure finance for maintenance, many companies run to failure. They don't necessarily do predictive maintenance. That's a best world scenario, and it's really admirable, and I love it. It's the way things should be. But the reality of where we are today, these tools have to be built into the technology when it's delivered, and it's an adaptation process that requires it, and it is the way to go. And I'm not saying I'm not advocating it. I'm wondering how fast can you spool this up, because the demand is going to be extremely high as soon as it hits the market. And I think the problem is that we need to start implementing solutions to address the demand, because otherwise we're just going to continue to, if you let someone down, then it's going to denote or devalidate the offering, and we can't afford to have a false start here.
Yeah.
And I think that's all I'm advocating is there strategic planning going on to support the global demand at every level? Because if it's not there, it's a great idea. And I mean, I was part of those big sales, asset performance management contracting sales with ABB and Honeywell. And I can tell you personally, brilliant-minded approach, 30% improvement in your productivity. We promised it all. We'll replace your controls. We'll do these things. And we'll also optimize your maintenance through having better access to your work operations.
Well,
and standard procedures.
I don't mean to cut you off because we're getting close to the end period. I guess I am cutting you off, but this idea of run to failure being acceptable is not acceptable. I mean, in both these cases, you know, if the marking on the packaging equipment or on the product doesn't run, you can't ship product. You can't have revenue. Run to failure is not acceptable for that piece of equipment. If you talk about the medical equipment, run to failure is not acceptable. And we could go through a whole bunch of industries where run to failure for critical pieces of equipment, either for revenue reasons, safety reasons, product loss reasons, is totally unacceptable. And as somebody deeply involved in reliability, I just cannot accept that as the default maintenance strategy for critical pieces of equipment. Now, there are other pieces of equipment that are non-critical, and certainly that's a viable strategy, but not for critical equipment like what we're talking about. Elevators, you could go down a long list.
Do you consider the control system a critical piece of equipment
Of course.
that runs the plant? It's absolutely crucial. How many obsolete control systems are in the market today? I can't count the number. It's so big.
Well, you can quote our ARC. We've said, I don't know if that's still the number we quote, but we've said there's $52 billion worth of DCS systems that need to be replaced because they're so old.
And they're running to failure.
But those systems do have backup systems. Those systems, particularly in refineries, have safety systems like HEMA offers, where if something goes wrong, there's a system to automatically shut down the process before people get hurt, et cetera. So I just, well, we'll agree to disagree. Did I see a hand go up? Okay, this is the last question.
I'm changing the subject. Justin here. I'm from GE Digital, and I absolutely love the stories of your service organizations changing and ultimately becoming a more critical part of the business. So I just want to hear from the both of you what has the change meant for you, like in terms of like how you're treated in the company and like the culture of how important you are, and maybe even like do you have more time for your own lives? Like what has the change meant for you, like changing the service organization?
Well, for Medtronic, it was quite substantial. I mean, we went from historically a loss center. We are not a profit center prior to ServiceMax. Now we are a profit center. The organization is investing immensely into our group right now. So, out of the outcomes of what we saw there and all the data analysis that we now have at our fingertips, we're hiring professional staff like marketing people and IT people and and a couple of additional engineers to help us solve more problems. So the investment, it really helped us from the investment side.
What has it meant for you as like a professional? So a lot of companies, they don't have a chief service officer, but do you think that's going to be something that's more important in the future? A seat at the executive table.
Well, right now I sit fairly high up, but not all the way at the top. I don't think Medtronic is going to. Medtronic's businesses they're structured completely different. They focus on they have different customer bases, different technologies, different strategies. So I don't really see that happening in the Medtronic world, but I'm
going to paraphrase what Victor said a little bit. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I think what he just said is he went from prior to this to a cost center, which needed to be, from an executive management viewpoint, needed to be optimized. Which means how do I reduce the costs, and sometimes in unpleasant ways. Now he's a P&L center. He's generating revenue. Now, it takes on a whole different meaning from not only how they're treated, but also his career path too. When you're generating revenue and profit, there's a much different degree of respect for you. Would you agree?
Yeah, exactly. And professionally, it was rewarding just to watch my people grow too, right? Mm-hmm. So, giving them available data and visibility to that data is been incredible. And to watch what they can do with that data is even more incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a similar story. I think it's an excellent question, basically, because for years the company was not interested in what we were doing, basically. Right. We had to keep the equipment running. That's it. And now, when the CEO said, "Okay, now you run your business as a profit center," then suddenly, we get help from everybody, And they say, "Oh, you have to do this, you have to do that," and if they deep dive a little bit into the subject, they see, okay, well, it's not so bad what you're doing, no? And so the topics are quite complicated. But what we see now is that, with all the technology changes and so on, and the recognition that services is the future, we will get a seat on the table. Yeah. And it will be soon, I think in the coming months. And whether it's me or not doesn't matter. I think it's really a good achievement, basically. And I think we need basically different people like myself, because I'm technical, too much in the details. We need people with more sales approach and those kind of things to bring it really forward. But yeah, I think it's an excellent question. And without that happening, I see that people will change, but not to the extent that they talk to.
You know, on the flip side, sometimes you get too much help that you don't want too. So.
Yeah, well, that's the case.
Get propped out, right?
Well, thank you very much. Give a big round of applause for the panel members.